Welcome to Thelma Podcast Life Story Channel. In this episode, Miles talks to Andrew Grant about his interesting career in the Merchant Navy. At the age of 15, having never left Scotland before, Andrew decided to join the Navy and see the world. After finishing the Deck Apprentice course at Leith Nautical College and applying to several shipping companies, he got a job with Shell Tankers. His first trip in September 1954 took him to the Caribbean. Then he was off to the Middle East and the Gulf. In fact, by the end of his career, the only place Andrew hadn't visited was the Antarctic. We hear how Andrew rose through the ranks from deck apprentice to first mate, and whilst doing his second mate certificate, he met his wife Molly at the dancing. Courting from a distance wasn't easy, and in those days there were no mobile phones, emails or social media. The only way to communicate was by letters, sent and received on board ship when they arrived in port. In an emergency, personal messages could be sent, and latterly radio telephoning was available, but it was very expensive. Keeping in touch with loved ones wasn't easy. Andrew changed shipping lines a couple of times, trying to have more time at home, especially after he married Molly and they had their first son. But it seemed to be that the shipping companies still wanted him to be at sea for 6 months at a time. A decision was made to change career, and this is what he did. Andrew took himself to university and became a geography teacher. The perfect job for a well-travelled man. So sit back and enjoy.
Deciding to go to sea wasn't something I thought as a boy, but when my cousin married a person who was an officer with the Courier Line here in Leith, I thought, oh, that'll do me. So that's where it started, briefly. And the next thing I knew, I was down in Leith Nautical College at the tender age of about 15 and a half, taken on board for deck apprentice course. So I started that in 1953, I think it was, and there were 16 of us enrolled at the time. We all enrolled down at the Nautical College, which is no more, and were training on the Dolphin. The course lasted a year almost, and it was a very, very intensive course, basically. Various things like signalling, for instance, the Morse code, the semaphore and things like that, and also the International Code of Signals, which are flags that all mean different letters of the alphabet. Everybody knows about P and Qs. I mean, the P is all Blue Peter, which everyone has to return to the ship, and Q is for quarantine, so everybody wasn't allowed on the ship. So P and Q came together and got that phrase. Anyway, that's me coming over that. On top of that, we had to do things like learn about navigation and chart work, had to do lifeboat drills, and recite, basically, and get it engrossed into your brain the rules of the road for sea, which were very, very, because imagine two ships meeting and what do you do? And you probably know that ships have got lights on them, and it's known what these lights are and what they mean.
Yeah.
There was green to green and red to red, all is safe, so go ahead. That's the port and starboard, so you could do that. But if there was not a red light, you had to alter to starboard and all. I mean, it's gone through all the rule of the road as far as sea concerned. We had things about general ship management and a lot of things from painting to scrubbing decks to, on that respect. Rope work, where we learned to do all the different types of knots for different reasons. I could do a reef knot when I went in, and I think I'd do about 20 when I came out. Anyway, that's an aside. But anyway, after that year, or during that year, we were introduced to shipping companies, and Leith, as you know, at one time had loads of them. There was Courier Line, Ben Line, Salveson's, all sorts of other companies in Leith and round about Bernard Street. We could apply to them or further afield, and we got a list of shipping companies from the Shipping Federation that would take on apprentices. I applied for a few and was actually asked by Shell Tankers to come down to London for an interview. I'd never been out of Scotland at that time. But anyway, at the tender age of about, I was in my 15, maybe 16, went off down to London on the night train, arrived there about 5 in the morning and had a good wander around London on a light night. Went to Shell, their offices in Minories in London, and there met about another 20 people who were applying for it. So we had to go through an exam. We had to have an eye test, which I'd previously had anyway at Leith Nautical College, a medical, and then we had a one-to-one interview with the marine superintendents, which was quite exhausting, to say the least.
Well, yeah.
And after that, it was a whole day on meals and things during the day. We were told, we'll let you know what you get. So I thought, oh, well, anyway. And the next day, literally the next day, I just got home and there's a letter there from Shell offering me a job as deck apprentice.
Wow.
So that's me with a job.
Yeah.
But then before we did that, we had to do other things. We had to get documentation, like a British Seaman's identity card, a passport, which we needed. We'd also got a discharge book, which these things I've got, and medical certificates. The one thing we did get was a medical passport, and I've got mine from 1954 right through to present. And I don't know what all the problems are just now about people carrying it, but anyway, that's the side. So these were things we got there. And then because I'd agreed with Shell, we had to sign indentures as an apprentice with the company. And that was a rather large legal document that came through the post. I had to sign it, my dad had to sign it, we had to have a lawyer sign it, a justice of the peace signing it, and then a member of the Shell company sign it. And that was all supposed to be done together, as it was. If I recall, I did mine, my dad did his, and I went round the lawyers, got it done and sent it off to Shell, and they signed it. But anyway, that was me indentured. And that was it for, and the salary was quoted as well for 6 months on the basis of £48.12 and 6 a year. £48.12 and 6, less than £1 a week to go off to sea. But anyway, that was for 6 months. Later on, it went up to about 90, and then gradually increased. I think it was about 160 the final year as an apprentice. But anyway, that's by September that year, when I was about 16 and a half, I got a telegram from Shell saying, please attend to this place down in the Isle of Grain in the Thames with everything, and join this ship called the TES Salopus. Now, my parents had, unlike the Grey Funnel Line, which is the Royal Navy, by the way, everybody in virtually provides their own clothing. So I had a clothing list from uniforms down to underpants sent to me. And my mum and I came into Leith, because there was chandlers here in Leith that could supply that. And we went through this list and eventually filled up a huge box, basically, of all this material, which was my uniforms, working gear for the future. So that was all done. It must have cost my parents a fortune. I mean, I just don't know how they did it, but they did. So anyway, one morning in the September 1954, they saw me at the station in Linlithgow, where I came from, going off on this big adventure, as it was, down to London, carrying this great big trunk of clothing and putting the spot and notebooks and all sorts. But anyway, we got down to London, then went to the agent's office there, and they took me down to the Isle of Grain, and I was duly introduced to the ship and the ship's crew. It was quite an amazing, I can just remember that first day going up the gangplank. It's still engrossed in my memory.
Were you excited or were you nervous?
A mixture of all things. I mean, I've been looking forward to it, but suddenly this was me upon it. And basically what they said would be away for a year. For my parents and my sister, and they were really a little bit perturbed about it, going away for the year, rather like going into the forces and going wherever it was. Yeah. But anyway, I got on board, and there happened to be 4 apprentices, including me, on board the ship, all roughly from my age, 16 or whatever, up to about 19. So, and we were various ranked. Being the junior apprentice, the first one, I was introduced to the master and the mates, because these are the people I was going to work with. Each of us had separate little tasks. But the next morning, we duly cast off, and that was me off at sea. From the Isle of Grain down the Thames, down through the Channel and out into the Bay of Biscay, which I'll come to in a moment. But anyway, we were there and I was told what my duties would be by the mate. There was 4 apprentices, all in the one cabin, 2 bunks. It was quite a largish cabin. The ship was a T2, which is T2 SAE1 and a TES Therapus. That was one of these ships that was built during the war in a hurry.
Right.
23 weeks it took her from keel to sailing. The fastest it was ever done was 11 weeks for a T2. And these were tankers. And they were supposed to be workhorses, maybe lasting a year during the war because of submarine activity, sinking tankers, because oil was crucial. But a lot of them survived, and a lot of the companies like Shell, BP and whatever bought them over and used them for quite a number of years after the war. So this was a T2 built in 17 weeks. My duties as a junior apprentice, I didn't have watchkeeping duties initially, but basically it was bridge cleaning, doing all the brass work, using sudgy wads. Have you heard what a sudgy wad? It's a big wad of wool, discarded wool and things, which you use for soap and water and washing down all the bulkheads. So it's called a sudgy wad. There's a lot of songs about the sudgy wad.
I bet there is.
But you got to know the seaman's language as you go along. That and various other things that happened, but it was great. We got deck clearance work, and also painting and varnishing and all, and actually getting to know the ship's crew as well, because as well as us, the apprentices, the first, second, third mate and the master, there were the radio operators, there were the cooks, there was the stewards, there was the engineers and the firemen were all, the whole range of activities, but we all knew our own wee jobs. That was the beauty of it. And the only place we ever really met up, as often on, was in a smoke room, because on a tanker you couldn't smoke in the tanker unless it was a room at the end, stern of the ship, where you could all go in and have a smoke and play cards, and there was a snooker table and all the various things. We could muck in together. So that was very good. So anyway, we charged off 12 knots. Across the Atlantic. They went to, the first port of call was in Lake Maracaibo, which is a place called Cabimas, but you anchored off in Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela, and they had buoys which had, the oil was piped out to the buoy and you filled up the ship. So we actually filled a tanker, and there was a routine which I can't describe it all, at which tank, because there was 27 tanks on this ship, and there was a routine of which tank went first, and then so the ship would be completely stable throughout.
And how long would that take then to fill the tank?
It took about 2 days to fill. It's called, it never stopped. It just keeps, you can imagine a hose running for 2 days, a garden hose, how much you get from it. Well, these were about 12-inch pipes that were coming on board. We had a manifold on that ship, if I can recall, there was 4 inlets, so you could use all 4. But on Maracaibo it was only 1, but it still pumped a huge lot of oil in. Makes the tremendous economy for Venezuela. But anyway, we took that from there to a Caribbean island called Curacao. It's in the Netherlands Antilles. There's the 3 islands, call them ABC, Aruba, Bonaire and Curacao. And Curacao, to enter Curacao, there was a canal went through the middle of the town. Right through the middle of the town. The ships came in there to the refinery, which was quite a distance off, away from the town. But that was my first first time I put feet in foreign soil, unless you count England as foreign. So anyway, that was Cabimas and Curacao. Now we did the run from Cabimas to Curacao for about six or 7 times, and then we took a cargo of crude oil over to Stanlow in England, and the ship went down to Middlesbrough after that and went into dry dock, which was good because we had all sorts of things like scraping on the side of the ship, which is not the most pleasant thing. But anyway, we did that. A couple of the other friends, the apprentices who were on the ship, they left and 2 newer ones came on board. They were the juniors. I was up the senior one. But anyway, while we were there, we shouldn't have done it, but the skipper said to the 4 of us, we can give you some time off if you want to go home for a week and come back again. So I duly went home for that week. And that was just before Christmas in 1954.
So that was over a year you've been away?
It wasn't that. No, that was only 6. That was only about 8 weeks.
8 weeks. Okay. Well, that was fine.
So anyway, I had that week's leave. Saw a lot of my mates and went down to the school and told them I'd been out to the Caribbean, which in those days folk wouldn't believe. But anyway, that was it. So anyway, after that leave, we got back and we went to sailed out again, but this time we went out to the Middle East. Out to the Gulf area, and from then on I had a tremendous the voyages we had from then on were really worldwide, because during the remainder of the year I was on just over a year on the ship. We went to the Gulf, we went out to the Far East, to Singapore, Hong Kong, we went to the Philippines, Borneo, which I really liked. We're down to Australia, we went over to South America, but to Eva Peron, you know where that is? They're called the port after there. And then back up to the Caribbean again and over to Africa. So, I mean, that was a tremendous trip of all different places, a worldwide cruise, basically. In the period I was on board, let's see now, I left her on the 25th of October the following year. So I was on her for 1 year, 1 month and 16 days. That's not precisely. And in that time we'd sailed, I've got it tied down as 96,120 nautical miles. Anyway, I left the Salopus, had 6 weeks leave, so I went home. Instead of me doing the washing, which was rather rough and ready, as I think I might show you a photograph of me scrubbing my breeks on the deck when it was all oily. After that, I went on to 6 weeks leave, which was very good, but I left home before Christmas and joined another ship, the Tectus it was. And again, here on the Tectus, there was quite a number of years. There was another T2. So I got to know tankers quite well. By that time I was now getting up to senior apprentice, a promotion. But anyway, instead of doing the day work, which was all the cleaning as I mentioned earlier, I also then started learning about the navigation system. I was attached with first of all the third mate, whose duties were largely safety equipment, and the second mate, but I'll come back to them, the second mate, which was largely about navigation, and mate himself has got overall cargo responsibilities. But anyway, that went on to there, but the Tectus, when I sailed around with her till we got to Singapore, and at Singapore I was taken off by the marine superintendent that was there, and for a few days I was in the sailors' home there, which was very good because I got to go to know Singapore quite well. Singapore as it was, no skyscrapers, with tremendous area there. And I was transferred to another ship, the Diplodon, which we generally sailed around the area of the Far East, going to Singapore, Indonesia, up to Bangkok, and a couple of other ports in Thailand, up to Hong Kong, the Philippines, Borneo, which I really got to like Borneo, a surprising country, and all around the Far East. And we went down to Australia a couple of times as well to discharge oil, taking oil all the time, I should say. That you filled up and you cleaned the tanks and then got the next cargo between passages where you picked it up and where you actually dropped it off at refineries, which will then purify it, make into petrol or aviation spirit.
I was going to say, the cleaning of the tanks must have been a very important part.
It was. I mean, if you cleaned, but you had to clean them between one. It was all right if you were doing the same type of, like say, Curacao and Cabimas.
Right.
But didn't do much there because it was the same stuff we were putting on board and discharging. But when we were doing things like the Diplodon and the other tankers I was on, you had to clean them thoroughly because you were taking different types of oil.
Of course.
It could be one trip crude oil, the next trip it might be aviation spirit, for aeroplanes.
Oh, God, yeah.
And in one case it was slack backed, which was like candle grease. For that went in. What you have actually to do that is there are two. There was holes in the deck, and you could open these up, and you lowered this machine inside, which went round like a shower, and really belted round like fast, and you could lower it down gently, and all the oil would, or the residues, would drain to the bottom, where it became a sludge with water and oil.
Right.
But that was then pumped to a number 9 tank, which is at the stern of the ship, and that was held there. And you did that with all the tanks till you cleaned them out. It might not, for a voyage, it might not be every tank, but it depends what you were carrying and when.
Yeah.
So that was all done. The Butterworth machine it was called, and it just went spinning around like mad. And of course the engineers had to pump all the hot water through from the boilers.
Yeah.
Because it was all washed down with hot water. It seems surprising the amount it was used, but it just kept getting recycled.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was on a tanker anyway, quite a problem there.
Yeah.
And that's what we used to get. You went out because it was a mucky job.
Oh, yeah.
And the particular job that happened on a couple of occasions was when the tanks of crude oil being pumped into the ship overflowed and covered the deck in crude oil. You can imagine what that's like.
Oh.
So it was a case of getting your welly boots on and cleaning all this stuff off. A really mucky job. And your clothing, it's just appalling. I won't go in, but that happened very seldom because everything was done doing that.
Mm.
So anyway, I did all the voyages again on the Diplodon, and eventually, after about another year on her, or a year, it was getting near the time to get back home again. So they transferred me again to another ship, a smaller one, which was going from Singapore up to the Gulf. It was called the Niso, this one. And then when we got to the Gulf, had a couple of days staying in a Gulf residence, we'll put it that way. And I was transferred to the one, the Valsella. But the Valsella, because it was the Gulf War was on at the time, I thought I'd be home for Christmas, but because the Gulf War, we were rerouted down round the Cape of Good Hope, and then back up through the Canary Islands. We stopped off Las Palmas there to refuel, and then back to Britain. So I came came home again as a senior apprentice. I got back to the UK after the Valsella and had a little bit of leave as a senior apprentice then. But 5 weeks after that, we got a bit of a shock when this happened. I was at home, just waiting again to be transferred to another ship. They actually sent me to another ship called the Naiadas, but this time as third mate, uncertificated third mate. So you can imagine what I felt, and that was in the 13th of February 1957, I think it was, right? But that was me, a promotion to third mate, and I thought, I must have been doing something good while I was as an apprentice and a senior apprentice. I think I did. Everything went well when I was there, and I must have been doing something right. But anyway, when with third mate, one of the third mate's jobs is when you leave port and come into port, the third mate's always on the bridge, and he controls the telegraph and everything and all that after orders from the captain. To it. So that was my first thing. And then the captain on that day too, said, right, you're third mate, just take her down through the channel. And I said, what? Through the channel? I said, no experience. So that was me in charge of taking the ship down the channel. But anyway, we was various responsibilities as a third mate has, which I had to take on, even as I was 18, 19 years old at this age. So, and the third mate job, in every ship, it's almost the same, it doesn't matter where you go. The third mate's responsible for safety, for the lifeboats and for hoses, firefighting equipment and all that. That was one of his responsibilities, in addition to navigation and getting the ship from A to B. And also taking over a watch. And the third mate's watch is from 8 to 12, which is not too bad. I mean, 8 to 12 each day. But after 12 at lunchtime, there was always something else you had to do in the afternoon. So it wasn't an
afternoon off.
No, you did that. And then when you got to port, you had all sorts of jobs like attaching the hoses that I've mentioned earlier to the ship and as well. So we did that. So again, quite a lot of the voyages I had then were around Europe. I went up the Black Sea, up the Norwegian coast, to France and Spain, and taking oil there. And then we went out back again to the Far East, which I went and going to Borneo, to Miri, and to Indonesia, quite a lot there. And again, about another year on this voyage, 3 voyages in 4 years. But this time when I got back into it, I almost had the sea time in. Well, I did have the sea time in that I could go for the next certificate. And they recognised that out in Singapore, so they put me on a Comet and flew me home. All my gear coming back by another ship, sometime or another, which I had to go down to London to collect, by the way, which was another story in itself. But anyway, one of the things I did do was take my bicycle with me when I went on these ships, and that had to come back. I said to sell it, but they didn't. They sent it back. But anyway, I had to pick that up in London. Anyway, that was it. That was that. Then I came back from Singapore and came back to Leith Nautical College, go through the course we had to get the second mate certificate. Mm-hmm. Now, the way the mate certificates work, you get your second mates to be third mate, and mates to be first second mate, and then a master's before you can become a mate. But anyway, that's an aside. In due course, I got them all. But I came back here, and it was about a few months of going back at the college, and then I had the examinations to sit and all that, and eventually, and not only just studying for the certificate, you had to do other things like lifeboat instructions and things like that, and how to work a gyro compass, and all, you had to do all these sort of extra courses, which was very good. In the evening, another friend and I were able to go off to the dancing up here at Decline Leith, so we did that. I stayed for some nights, quite a lot, in fact, at the Sailors' Home here in Leith, rather than travel back and forth to my parents' house. So 2 of us went off to the dancing periodically, and it's there I met Molly, my wife. Anyway, that aside, I'd done all the courses. I got through them okay. In fact, quite good marks and whatever it was. And having done, as I said, 4 voyages, almost 4 years, I thought, going away for a year and courting's not the best thing. So I thought about that. So I applied to other more relevant ones, and I was actually taken on board by the Ben line here in Leith, which pleased me because a few of the guys I went to the Dolphin with were already in with the Ben line. I was appointed to the Ben line in August 1958 as a third mate. And this was a certified, shouldn't say certified, but anyway, it's a certificated officer at this time. So I've got my second mate's ticket. But this was completely different to me. It was a different world. From attaching pipes and taking oil on board, you were taking general cargo on board. And at that time, it wasn't containers, it was every wee box of whatever it was manhandled and put in certain places. One of the responsibilities I had later on as mate was actually allocating spaces on the ship to take various whatever you were carrying. Because you had to take something off and to put something back on board to come out.
Logistics of
the
that
logistic,
are amazing.
it's crazy. But basically at that time, one of the main, not the main I should say, but one of the large, that was the forces who were actually abroad. At that time there was quite a large number of forces before they started bringing them all home. So we took a lot of stuff out for the NAFI and things like that in various places. And we were going through the voyages were usually almost identical. You went out to Gibraltar and then through the Suez, through the Panama Canal, not blocking it. Hopefully down the Red Sea to Aden, then out to various ports in Malaysia, Port Swettenham, and then down to Singapore, up to Bangkok usually, then to Singapore, then to Hong Kong, and then sometimes to the Philippines for copra, lots of that stuff back, and down to Borneo where we loaded lots of timber. Sarawak Ramen brought that home. So we were taking all anything. One memorable time was we had a cargo which comprised of a hell of a lot of golf clubs. And one of the things you had to look out for as an officer on deck when you were going up and down into the holds was the diesel fitters, who were purloining various stuff. Diesel fit my mum, diesel fit my sister, diesel fit my dad. So they're diesel fitters. And then you could also go, when you go on to some of the pubs, particularly in Liverpool, you could always get Cargo brand. It was better than stuff out of Lewis's or whatever shops you went to. So there was diesel fitters and Cargo brand. But anyway, you had to watch out for that when you were in port. But that's what we were doing. We're down checking what was going on and how much of it's going on, and also completely different from a tanker. A really more interesting thing in some respects. And then bringing materials back. And coming back was the same. We usually, after going round there, we'd go back to Malaysia and load up with rubber. A lot of rubber there. In the Philippines, copra was one of the main things we brought back from there, because that was brought back basically to Germany for making margarine and whatever. And timber, that was another one. But it was so difficult to describe what one cargo would comprise of. It could be all sorts of things.
I'm just wondering, when you say rubber, rubber picking it up from, what's it? How is it? What's it consist of?
It's very spongy, and it's all folded. When they dry the rubber, they dry it in, like, say, trays, and then they fold each of these up, and then get a whole pack of them till they're about, I'd say, roughly about 3 feet by 3 feet by about 2 feet thick. And it was quite it wasn't hard like you get cars. It was just soft, spongy material, and that went in. Of course, you filled the hold up. By the time you got to where it was being discharged, it actually all compressed. Of course. And that was even worse to try and get off. So when you were putting rubber down, one of the things you had to scatter talcum powder over everything. So you could, if you had hold of that, you came up white every day, even though you were wearing blues. But anyway, that was the site. And copra was the one. I don't know just why you do it, but with copra, you had copra bugs, which are little beetles that got in everywhere. They were in your food, they were in your cabin, until you hit the cold weather, and that killed them all off. But anyway, we loaded all that sort of stuff up out in the Far East, brought it back, again coming back through the Suez Canal, Mediterranean, and then again a normal route was to go from, when we came in, we didn't go right to Britain, we went to Hamburg and discharged an awful lot of the rubber and the copra, not all of it, but a lot of it. And then we come over to London and go into Victoria Dock in London, which is now no longer a shipping dock. and discharged what we had there. But while we were in the ship was in London, you got off and leave. You went off, usually had about 3-4 weeks leave, and then back on again and repeating it, and depending which ships. My time with, I thoroughly enjoyed the time with Ben Line and got to know a lot of people on it. Anyway, I met one or two of the people that I originally gone to the Dolphin with up too, because they were on other ships who did that. Say that not every one of the people that actually went through the nautical college for training deck purposes actually stayed at sea. I mean, I'm sure I didn't do it either. But some of them did it very early. Some of them was peculiar jobs. If I can interject here. One went off to Canada with the North Pacific group that were over there, and he married a Cree Indian and became more or less the president of the Northwest Territories in Canada. That was one of them.
Oh, goodness.
Another one who I met in my later life was he left to sea and became a lecturer in the university here and taught geography, which eventually I did. One opened a fruit shop in Leith Walk, and another one became a manager of a store up at Toll Cross somewhere. Others did other things, but that's just examples where they came back and what they did. But anyway, with the Ben Line, we went out. I was on the Ben Vanach for a while, for almost a year, over a year in fact, with her going back and forth to the Far East. Experience was very good, because I got to really like the Far East and various parts of it. But anyway, after that year, I was able to go down and sit for my first mate certificate, which I duly did at that time. Every time I came back, my wife and I met up and was courting at distance, I'll put it that way. They came back for the first mate certificate, and during that period of time we got married, my wife and I. And I got my first mate certificate just about the same time as we were married, so it was quite nice. But anyway, having done that, I went back off with the Ben Vanach again and the Ben Rinnis, which is a ship, another one of the ships. And this time I was going out as second mate, no longer first, third mate, second mate, promotion again. Yeah. The only problem with the second mate job is that the watches are 12 to 4. So you get up at 11:30 at night, work through to 4 o'clock, and then go. And the problem with that is 9 times out of 10 you were entering port at 6 in the morning, so you had to be up for that. So you took care of it. It was very tiring sometimes, exhausting, but also you were responsible as second mate for doing all the chart work, all the laying down all the courses and things of that nature. And every time you came back to port, you got this Notices to Mariners booklet, which is one that told you all the changes that had been made to lighthouses or buoys or routes in, or where they found shoals or whatever it was. And all the charts had to be checked out. And you had to have the charts for everywhere you went, and all different scales. I mean, if you're going across the Atlantic, you can do it almost in an atlas. Not quite, but one chart would take you across. But when you got to the other side or wherever, you have to plot the courses through islands or shores and everything. And out in the Far East, that's particularly difficult because there's so many islands and shoals no one knows exist even now. And then the passages we took were through the very narrow channels, so you had to go left, go right here, it was that, and you had to plot it all. I mean, if you could do it, but then the master had to say, that's right, that's what we'll do. Or sometimes you would rub it out and say, we'll go a wee bit further off the coast there, or whatever. So it was very good. In fact, talking of that, one of the ships that I was up with in the Shell, one of the tankers hit a reef out in the Far East in the Palaman Passage, which goes up the side of the Philippine Islands. Never been charted, and it ripped the bottom out of her, and she went down. Fortunately, everybody got to the lifeboat in time. But I met them actually in Borneo just after that actually happened. Met the whole crew and had a good chat with them. I came back from the Ben Rinnis and they put me on, I was off her, and then they put me on coastal duties, which, as I mentioned earlier, the ship would come in and we got off and leave, but they put another crew on board so you could, and this was during a winter, so it was going back over to Hamburg or Belgium or France or somewhere around the coast here in Britain. And doing that, and no sooner had you got off that ship than you were put on the next ship, and I went on, and I did that for about 6 months. So but it was atrocious. I mean, sometimes I'd get home for a couple of days, and I've been married by this time. That wasn't the best of starts to married. But anyway, I did this, and then I went. I won't go into details, but let's say I left the Ben line because it was good. For that, I mean, when they asked me to immediately after this to go away on another 6-month voyage, I said it's not on. But anyway, I thought, well, shall I get a shore job? And I stuck around for I think it was about a couple of months, nothing coming. So I decided to go back to sea again, and I went with Ellerman and Papiani lines, which is a different company. Ellerman was a famous shipping company, right up to the 70s, basically. Because they had different lines that went to different places. There was the port line, the Ellerman Papiani, which I was on, the Ellerman City line, which went to various African things and whatever. But anyway, I went with them, and they were better, actually, but in some respects. The ships were a wee bit different too. Some of them were wartime-built ships as well, which were built for cargo. But anyway, they were based largely, Papiani were based largely in Liverpool, and the Tower Building. So we went there. That was our main office. And they actually employed me again, first of all as a second mate, and later on when I got time off to go and do my master's ticket, which I got, and then I became first mate with them. So in charge of so he was the guy I was looking up to when I was a junior apprentice. Wow. So then I had the apprentices.
So how many years did it take you to get from the lowest to the masters?
Well, from let's see now. No, I'm just trying to think. No, it was 8 years. Right.
That's still good.
From that to master. It's 8 years from junior cadet up to being first mate. So anyway, I joined the Ellerman, and I was on 7 ships with them for various reasons. They kept transferring, and their trade was basically down the Mediterranean. It was great going down. We went to Gibraltar, to South Marseille, down all the ports in Italy, and all at the same time, to Greece, out to Israel, to Cyprus, along the North African coast. Again, some of it was taking supplies out to the British troops, but a lot of it was general trade. Like when we came back, we would go to Israel and bring back a whole cargo of oranges in boxes, which is a tip you used to get a box of oranges yourself to bring home. They were lovely, big, juicy. I could still salivate over them. And they brought dried fruit back from Greece and stuff like that. And obviously taking all the NAFI, the goods out to, and not only this there was armaments we took out sometime and things like that, and also vehicles for the forces to use, and also toys for the kids because they had their families out there wherever they were too. So we did that. But anyway, I was doing that for a while, and I was then released to do my master's ticket while I was with them. I got that very quickly, and there was other qualifications involved as well. Right. So anyway, I stayed with them, and then one of the ships that they actually asked me to go on was called the City of Durham. That was one of the Ellerman City ships. And I said, "Oh, yeah, fine." They said, "Oh, it's going out the far. You're on loan to the Ben line." So anyway, I went back out to the Far East again with the same sort of cargoes that we were getting before and bringing them back. And at that time, the British Merchant Navy was on a downer. It was getting worse and worse. So I still had on my mind, I'll get a shore job of some sort. But anyway, when I was promoted, as I say, to first mate. One of the first ships I was on was called the Malaysian. And the Malaysian was built in Leith.
Oh,
This is design.
right here.
Right here in Leith. Just where we're sitting now.
Yeah. Bizarre, isn't it?
The Malaysian, and then later on I was on another one. It was same design, same. It was the Catanian that was here. So anyway, the two of them, and then I did quite a lot while I was on the Ellerman's. I really liked it as a company. It was good to work for. They were nice people. But during that time too, my wife produced their first son. It was due, and I told them I don't want to be away from that, and they said, "Okay, we'll put you on relief duties in Liverpool." So in Liverpool, I was there, and the ships come in, I'd take over and do. I mean, it was quite helpful and doing all the work that a first mate had to do there.
Yeah.
And then one day, 2 days after my birthday, in fact. The super came and said, "You're not way home yet." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, sent a message down, your wife's gone into labour."
Oh, no. Oh, for God's
So he
sake.
said, "Pack your bags and go home." So literally, in the dirty gear I was wearing, I packed my bags and was down at the Lime Street station. And they said, "Oh, the train's not to so-and-so." So I hired a car and drove home. So anyway, I got home and I got down to the Eastern General where my son was born about an hour before he was actually came into being. But anyway, so they allowed me to stay at home for 6 weeks because the child, my wife looking at it. And then I went back to sea again and we started to think about shore jobs much more at that time. But anyway, I carried on Mediterranean trade for a while. And the one like the Malaysian I mentioned earlier, she was a great ship. But all we did was go from Liverpool to Porto, down to Lisbon, back to Porto and back to Liverpool. It was just like a wee ferry going back and forth.
Lovely.
On the way out, taking all sorts of stuff, and on the way back, port. Casks and casks of port.
Right.
And it used to be great where we'd tied up was underneath where these bridges are that you see in any photographs of Porto.
Yeah.
And underneath the river, on the Tagus River, were all these places where they kept the port to mature. And we used to be taken down there at lunchtime, and it was very cold under there, as you can imagine, and sample the produce, so I'll put it that way. And you came up from there and hit the heat. That was
Light-headed, shall we say.
Many cheery days we had in Porto. Anyway, that's an aside. But anyway, at that time, they were doing a big recruitment scheme in Scotland, particularly, a special recruitment scheme for teachers, which was when they changed the school leaving age from 15 to 16. I wouldn't have been at sea if that had happened.
No.
But anyway, the 15 to 16, and we decided I'll see if I could do that. So lo and behold, when I went up to be interviewed, they said, "Yeah, we'll take you on, but first of all, you've got to get the examinations to get into university, go to university, and then teachers' engagement." So anyway, I went up to Napier College, and they said, I had to agree to this, first of all, Napier College as it was.
Yeah.
And they said, "Oh, you have to have hires to get into university." And I said, "What about my master's ticket?" And all that entailed, which are tremendous. And they discounted it.
No.
I was amazed. I said, "You know what's involved?" But anyway, that's not. They said no. So I joined this queue for people to go for hires. And the woman that was interviewing me at the other side said, "Now, what hires do you want to do?" Which I thought was do maths, French, you had to have a language, English, and whatever, geography. And she said, "Oh yeah, when did you get your O grades?" I said, "I haven't got O grades." She said, "I've got a master's ticket, but which is all No, you can't do that. You have to do O grades first before you," and they wouldn't accept that. And I said, I can't do that. I can't do that. I said,
no.
I want to get into uni quickly.
Yeah.
I've got 6 months. No, and she said, no, you've got to have O grades first. So I thought, well, to heck with you, dearie. And I went away and joined another queue, and this woman said, came up with the same question, what O grades have you got? I said, I had them ages ago. I said, I'm not going, I just want to go for hires now because I'm doing. She said, all right, sign on. So anyway, with a wee while at Napier College, then went through university where one of the lecturers, as I mentioned already, was went to sea as well.
Course, yeah.
And then I got my degree in teaching post and started teaching geography.
Well, if ever there was a practical course for doing geography, you must have done it by doing all that travel, I would say. That was
I used
amazing.
to tell the professors about it. I said, you got that wrong. There was one, if I can just interject on that point, because there was one time that, I'll tell you a couple of stories actually.
Yeah.
But this was what we were doing about poverty, which is worldwide, and he was talking about poverty and about what people was and what that was and all the other. And I said, you've forgotten the most essential thing about it. This is in front of 200 other students. What do you mean? Because you got used to me talking.
Yeah.
I said, you forgot the one thing. You've never mentioned the smell. I said, if you go through Calcutta and Bombay, I said, all the things you're saying are there, but you've not mentioned the smell. I said, the smell that tells you poverty.
That's a very good point.
He did that.
Yeah.
That was one. But another man, I must tell you, we're talking about, you might want to delete this one later. But anyway, we had, whenever we went to the States, the United States, it was during the Prohibition period and all sorts. Before Envy got ashore, there was a whole group of people, customs and goodness knows what, medical officials and whatever it was, and they actually all said to us, no, you have to be checked by that, you had to go through a medical examination, and then you were questioned about your politics. And of course everybody was a true blue, nobody was a red, going into the States. You
Is that right? I didn't realise
if you said you voted Labour, nobody was allowed ashore. So they're all true blues, conservative. But that's my history at sea. It was good.
Well, as always, fascinating. But a couple of things I was going to ask you. Generally, what was the state of where you stayed on board ship? Was it?
It varied on the T2, which was built very quickly, and the Liberty ships, which later on were built, and they were just built as boxes, basically, to carry cargo, hoping it would survive the Second World War. I can't give you a dimension now. The cabin that the 4 apprentices had, there was two sets of 2 bunk beds, a table in between. We had a shower and toilet and lockers, and I'd say that was basically it. Right. But you were given all the clothes, their mattresses, and the sheets were changed every week. That was one thing I must say. And, quite basic. Yeah, but you got used to it. I mean, that's the Benline ships. Some of them were excellent, like Ben Loyal that I mentioned. Yeah, she'd all really modern, good cabins for the crew. Once you became a third mate, second mate, whatever, you had your own cabin, the master. Right. And the master always usually had a suite, a day room, and as well as a bedroom. Wow. And the mates sometimes had their own room plus an office on it because he had all the paperwork and everything of the cargoes that we'd carried. That was quite good. The modern ships in Ellerman were good, but the older ones were like the T2s. They were built in a hurry. Yeah. They had boxes for cabins, but they made them as comfortable as possible. Mind you, most of the time you were out and about anyway, in the ship. Yeah. So, but and the food was always, it depended on the chief steward, and they made up the menus and the cooks. But the food in most cases was, I'd say, as good as you get in any cruise ship today. Wow! Not the quantity or the variation, but on taking 3 basic courses.
Yeah.
Breakfast was usual. You could get porridge, bacon, egg, whatever it was.
Wow.
Lunchtime, there was salads, there was meat, there was also soup and sweets, and the same in the evening. So,
Very
and
good.
that was all the companies were about the same. One shipping company which we applied to was called the Hogarths. So they were a Glasgow company, and it was called the Hungry Hogarths. So they, I mean, they all had names for them.
Yeah.
But Ben Line and its competitor, the Blue Funnel Line, which is from Liverpool, they were competing with the traffic going out to the Far East. But the decline of the British Merchant Navy occurred roughly about when I was leaving.
Yeah.
The number of ships were declining, the need for them was different.
Yeah.
There's competition from other shipbuilders, not British shipbuilders, and that has continued even to today.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Italians were building, and then of course the cruise ships which are there now. I call them villages at sea.
Oh, absolutely. They're huge. Did you ever come into Leith docks to
Once.
load? Oh, right.
Grangemouth a few times.
Right.
When Ben Line, some of the cargoes were discharged there, but it was only Leith was once, and it was on was it the Crossbeam? I can't remember. I think it was. We came back from Cyprus with a cargo of potatoes and carrots,
Right, and they came in.
and the carrots had gone to mash.
Oh, no.
You had to ventilate the holds all the time. But I always, as I said to my wife, the vegetables breathe. And if you compact them, they're not able to get the...
No, suffocate.
Suffocate. I mean, if you keep things like potatoes or carrots or whatever in the poly bags, they'll go off
True,
quickly.
that's true.
Potatoes are usually kept in crates like you'll see in farms or whatever. On this occasion, the carrots weren't put in the right place. And that wasn't my fault. That was the agent out in Cyprus. But anyway, that's an aside.
Yeah.
I was mate at the time.
And you've spoken about going to so many countries, and you particularly loved Borneo.
Oh, yes, I did.
Was there a part of the world that you never got to and you wished you had?
Antarctic.
Right, yes. There's not much up there, is it?
No, I've got literally all around. I mean, and particularly when I was with Shell, because the ships weren't confined to a route, we'll put it that way. It was just when, in fact, one time, if I can give you an example of what happened, we loaded up with the crude from Lake Maracaibo, and we were to take it over to Ghana. Right, why there, I don't know. Halfway across, we got redirected to Gibraltar. Then we were redirected again to come to Britain, and then we were redirected again to go to Haifa and Israel. I mean, that's the sort of things that happened with that, because it wasn't like a cargo for Joe Bloggs in London or whatever. This was oil that was needed somewhere, and we just we changed direction. That was just one voyage. That was a 6-week trip. Fortunately, we made it. We hadn't run out of fuel for it.
That'd be ironic, wouldn't it?
It was going all over the place. But that's the sort of thing that happened with them. And then we went, as I say, we went up and down the Maracaibo Curacao run a lot, and then we'd go off somewhere else. They'd just take you off because they needed oil wherever.
And did you ever, you've not spoken about, did you face really rough seas? You must have done.
When I first went to sea, the first few days, as I mentioned, we went through the Thames and down the Channel. Not too bad. The ship was rolling a wee bit and pitching a wee bit. Then we hit Biscay, and it was a bad time. And she was rolling quite a lot. And first time at sea, and for a few days I was quite ill. Beautiful one, but gradually you get used to it. But the worst one when I was actually, again, this is a story of a personal one, when we were going from Curacao up to Boston in the States. At one point we got hit by a hurricane. It was coming along, and that was really wild. The water was coming over us non-stop, and we were heading into the waves, because you always want to try and go over the ship bends. The ship flexes. But anyway, we're doing that. But we've got a rogue wave that came from the side. And at that time, I was a junior apprentice. and I was doing my duty on the bridge, which on a Saturday it was, because Saturday you always washed the floors and washed a house with them. So I had my bucket of suji, right, and my water, and I was scrubbing the deck and cleaning that up, wringing my sponge out in the bucket I had, and got hit with this rogue wave, and the ship went over about 30 degrees. So the bucket full of water, me, and everything else went flying across one side of the deck, and water everywhere, and then came back the other way, so it helped to wash the other side. It was crazy, and then we went back to normal pitching on, but I had all this water. Oh, that was terrible. And but I got the best piece of advice ever I had at sea was from the bosun on the ship, nice old guy. Yeah. Once I'd got up, and they all had a good laugh at me trying
they
to
would
cut
do, yeah.
water after it's gone. So I had that, and he says, Andrew, he said, one thing you must remember about being at sea is you have one hand for whatever you're doing, and the other one for yourself. One for the ship, one for yourself. And remember that, and I did. From then on, always when it was rough weather, I always saying I was holding something.
That's very, very wise advice. Yeah. That is. So, that's brilliant, Andrew.
But anyway, every time I went back after getting a ticket, I always had one or two queasy days. But
did
nothing.
You? Oh, that's interesting.
But then, okay.
Yeah. Fantastic. That was, as ever, absolutely brilliant.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast with Andrew. You can find more like it on our website, www.livingmemory.org.uk. Or if you have a story you'd like to share, why not pop in and see us at the Wee Museum of Memory, Ocean Terminal, Leith, or at the Centre, Livingston. Alternatively, you could give us a call on 07714 783 726 or email us at comhist@googlemail.com. Until the next time, take care.